I'm U.S. Election Assistance Commission Chairwoman Christy McCormick, and I'm calling this public meeting of the U.S. Election Assistance Commission to order. For the first order of business, I will call roll and establish a quorum. Vice Chair Ben Hovland.
Here.
Commissioner Donald Palmer.
Here.
Commissioner Thomas Hicks.
Present.
The quorum is established. I'll now take a motion to approve the agenda as submitted.
I move we adopt the agenda as submitted.
Second.
It has been properly moved and seconded to approve today's agenda as submitted. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Today's agenda as submitted has been approved. So I'd like to thank our panelists and those at home for joining today's public meeting on the EAC's electronic poll book pilot program. Today's event marks the culmination of a 2-year effort by the EAC's Election Supporting Technology Evaluation Program, or ESTEP. This team of dedicated EAC staff worked alongside accredited test laboratories and other stakeholders to examine the security, accessibility, and usability of e-poll books. An increasing number of election jurisdictions have begun utilizing these systems as they play a central role during the in-person voting experience. E-poll books supplement or substitute the use of traditional paper poll lists to access and track voter registration records. In recent years, they've also been used to streamline the check-in process, automate ballot issuing, and collect and display critical data. They can also enhance the security of the voting process by providing real-time confirmation that a registered voter can only check in and vote one time. Due to the increasing use of these systems, but varied standards that existed on the state level, the EAC recognized the need to establish a uniform set of standards for e-poll book testing and usage. The EAC has now collected findings and feedback from the Voluntary Electronic Poll Book Pilot Program, which will be presented today by those who participated in the program. We will also hear from state and local jurisdictions and voting system test laboratories, or VISTLs, on the importance of this technology. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Vice Chair Ben Hovland to provide his remarks.
Thank you, Chairwoman McCormick. I'm looking forward to the conversation today. While e-poll books were not used when the Help America Vote Act passed in 2002, they have become a common feature in many polling places across the country in recent years. And this technology has the ability to improve election administration and the voting experience. I've personally served as a poll worker with and without e-poll books. And I can tell you, when you're a poll worker and you're sitting at the check-in station with a paper poll book, and your section of the alphabet doesn't have any voters, and there's a line at the other section, you can see voters getting frustrated and you feel helpless. But in contrast, when you're at an e-poll book, you can just call up whoever's next. And that's just, sort of one example, a small example I think about on how e-poll books have changed the voting experience. And certainly Chairwoman McCormick highlighted a number of election innovations that e-poll books have made possible, and help explain why we've seen their expanded use across the country. And so, recognizing this trend, the EAC created the ESTEP program to evaluate the security and accessibility of election supporting technologies such as electronic poll books, but also electronic ballot delivery systems, election night reporting databases, and voter registration systems. This program was formally established in September 2022, and additional funding from Congress has permitted the EAC to launch the e-poll book pilot program that we're here to talk about, also to contract with the voting system test laboratories, or VISTLs, to conduct that testing, and add a number of election technology specialists to our staff to help oversee the pilot program activities. ESTEP's first responsibility has been to examine e-poll books to further understand the capabilities of the systems to meet minimum federal requirements that were initially released in January of 2023. This effort shows the EAC's focus on election technology that continues to evolve to support election officials across the country. The report and subsequent feedback will help inform the EAC's next steps in making this pilot a permanent fixture of the EAC's support to election administrators. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses, and thank you all for joining us. I'll now turn it over to Commissioner Palmer to provide his opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hovland. There is a strong national security demand for testing of election supporting technology such as electronic poll books. Throughout the past 15 years, the U.S. has witnessed a steady increase on the use of e-poll books during elections to serve voters and election workers. So according to the EAC voting survey, or the EVE survey, over 22,000 jurisdictions in 40 states used e-poll books during the November 2022 election, the general election. However, the oversight standards and testing of e-poll books varies nationwide. While some states permit the use of technology without explicit authorization in law, others require a formal certification. "31 states have laws or regulations specifically addressing the use of poll books, with 17 states that require cert. Several other states require the certification through an administrative rule or regulation. This pilot program is the EAC's first effort to offer consistent standards for this technology nationwide, as many states and localities have requested that additional standardization and testing. I look forward to hearing from our panelists today on how this may standardize device security, accessibility, and usability. Commissioner Hicks, I'll turn this over to you.
Thank you, Commissioner Palmer. Today, we'll be hearing from key stakeholders that have been crucial to understanding the capabilities of e-poll books in meeting the EAC's draft requirements. During the pilot program testing, these systems were tested against voluntary electronic poll book requirements, version 0.9. E-STEP developed these standards in consultation with the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, cybersecurity and accessibility experts, and others. It was necessary for the EAC to develop standardized requirements to ensure that 1, e-poll books are capable of providing a positive user experience. 2, mitigation of network-related security threats such as malware, ransomware, phishing, denial of service, and injection attacks can be enforced through testing and certification of these systems. And 3, human errors in configuring and utilizing security features are mitigated through advanced usability features. And 4th, all eligible voters have access to the process in the most accessible and efficient manner possible. The pilot program showed that the test systems required only minor changes, such as added documentation, to meet the proposed baseline standards. The program gives great confidence in the tested systems for use in 2024. I'll turn this back over to Chairwoman McCormick. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hicks. I'd now like to introduce Jay Phelps, the Director of the EAC's Election Supporting Technology Evaluation Program, who will discuss the findings of this pilot program. Mr. Phelps.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Can everybody see my presentation okay? Excellent. Well, good afternoon, and thank you to Chairwoman McCormick, Vice Chair Hovland, and Commissioners Hicks and Palmer for the opportunity to present a brief overview of the Election Supporting Technology Evaluation Program and the findings of its most recent pilot of electronic poll books. As the Chairwoman mentioned, my name is Jay Phelps, and I'm the Director of the Election Supporting Technology Evaluation Program, or EAC for short. Over the last several months, on behalf of the EAC commissioners, my team and I have had the incredible opportunity to conduct the first of its kind federal voluntary electronic poll book pilot. Before I get into the findings of the pilot, I would like to emphasize and make clear that the results of the pilot confirmed that our nation's electronic poll books are election day ready ahead of 2024. So as Commissioner Hovland mentioned, I want to just real quick give a brief overview again of the E-STEP program and kind of what the goal is we're talking about e-poll books today, and that is our focus, but we also want to talk about the security, accessibility, and usability of electronic ballot delivery systems, ENR reporting databases, and voter registration portals and databases as well. E-STEP is tasked with the creation of draft standards administration of pilot programs, and the presentation of findings. E-STEP aims to establish requirements for election technologies that are not covered under the voting system testing and certification program. So what are electronic poll books? Today, I will be covering an overview of electronic poll books and our pilot program with these systems. But first, what are electronic poll books, or EPBs? You'll probably hear me mention both in my presentation today. Simply defined, EPBs are laptops, tablets, or kiosks designed to replace paper poll lists. They can access digital voter registration records for their representative jurisdiction, and in contrast to voting systems, EPB's primary users are election workers, and they do not collect or tabulate cast vote records. In more recent years, these systems have evolved to serve a variety of administrative functions before, during, and after an election. EPBs can now be used to capture voter signatures, identify a voter's ballot style or preferred language, detect ineligible voters, and extract data reports, just to name a few. And here you see the landscape with electronic poll books throughout the United States. And as Commissioner Palmer noted, throughout the last 15 years, the United States has witnessed a steady increase in the use of EPBs during elections. The Election Assistance Commission first began tracking EPB usage in 2008, when only 23 states and territories reported using EPBs. In 2022, with our Election Administration and Voting Survey, or EAVS, we asked election administrators around the country if they were utilizing EPBs, and 40 states now and territories are currently utilizing electronic poll books. 19 of those are using them in all jurisdictions, and 21 are utilizing them in some jurisdictions. That is a 60% increase in comparison to the 2008 findings. And as you look here, also 34 states have some type of legislation or a certification program tied to the electronic poll book process, and nearly 2,300 jurisdictions utilize electronic poll books. And then this is just a quick glance of the chart that demonstrates the makeup of manufacturers across the United States. 89% are commercial systems, and 11% are in-house systems. Either the local jurisdiction or the state develop them kind of internally. And so why pilot electronic poll books first? Well, as noted in the previous slide, they continue to grow in popularity across the country, nearly 2,300 jurisdictions. And by next year, we expect to see that number even higher. And then the demand. There's a need to evaluate the security, the usability, and accessibility of these systems to help our stakeholders and prevent the possibility of voters voting twice. That's the kind of the nice thing that Commissioner Hovland alluded to, as well as eliminating human error and having all the records in kind of one central place, the voter records. So what did our pilot process look like? It involved a 7-phase process in which manufacturers demonstrated their ability to build, test, monitor, and maintain their EPBs according to standards developed by the EAC, which of course, with security, usability, and accessibility in mind. So the first phase was we developed requirements, developed pilot artifacts, established a test group. And I will say, we originally were kind of the goal was 3 manufacturers to test. But we had such an outpouring of support and demand that we ended up opening up. And so we have 5 manufacturers and 2 in-house systems from a state and local jurisdiction. And we're just really thrilled. I'm sure I'll say it at the end. I want to say it again. I cannot thank these participants enough for their time. And it's just been invaluable to work with them and to just better understand the process of electronic poll books. So thank you. And then, of course, evaluating the systems and testing labs. Review the pilot findings, present the findings, which is what we're doing today and in the coming weeks as well. And then the commissioners determine what to do with those findings. So our requirement considerations when developing requirements for electronic poll books. There are important differences between voting systems and electronic poll books that need to be noted. Some of these considerations or election workers are the primary users. Election workers are typically trained on the functionality and operability of electronic poll books. EPB should be designed in a way that is accessible and for users of all ages and disabilities. Voters may also interact directly with the electronic poll book. They may be asked to perform several tasks on the poll book, such as confirming identification on the screen, providing identification, address verification, signing their name electronically, or be given information on paper directing them to how to vote from the electronic poll book. The check-in is usually a public experience and not a private procedure like voting. So voter rolls are generally public with electronic poll books. And in some locations, names and addresses of voters are announced for observers and poll watchers. Check-ins is an assisted task with no expectation that it is necessarily done independently currently. The election worker and the voter may work together to complete the check-in process. Election workers assist all voters, including those with language or accessibility needs. An important consideration in setting accessibility requirements for electronic poll books is when and what type of assistance is acceptable and when it interferes with voter independence. And the electronic poll book hardware and software are different from voting systems. Electronic poll books are often assembled and come from a standard computing device, such as a laptop or a tablet. They run on a conventional operating system rather than a custom platform. And they often include several additional commercial off-the-shelf devices, such as a printer, signature pad, or a barcode scanner. And there's also more flexibility in how EPBs are set up for use. Unlike a voting system, electronic poll books can be set up for a specific team of election workers who will utilize them during election day. They can also, the screen can also be adjusted in size and display to mitigate any issues and making sure the screen is readable and clear. And then they may also include voter designations, such as the voter status. There may be requirements for actions by election workers that affect the fundamental nature of these tasks, such as reviewing or comparing a voter's signature to the image on file from the voter registration system, reading information on an ID card, or scanning it using a peripheral device. So our requirements overview at a glance, the Election Assistance Commission, broadly, and then also as the ESTEP team, work really closely with cybersecurity experts from Mandiant, as well as the National Institute for Standards and Technology, or NIST, to draft the electronic poll book requirements version 0.9 for pilot testing. The pilot process included soliciting feedback from stakeholders, reviewing relevant requirements on state and local level. As we mentioned, 34 states have some type of certification or legislation, so we reviewed those. And then continuous refinement based upon the feedback over a 15-month period for these requirements. The EAC drafted a comprehensive set of requirements representing the baseline expectations for security, accessibility, and usability. And notable highlights among these requirements include provisions for access control, physical security measures, safeguarding network and telecommunication access, and ensuring the core functionality of electronic poll books. And now I'd like to turn our attention to the Voting System Technical Laboratories, or VISTLs. And I would also like to thank them as well for their participation in this pilot. Both of that, you'll be hearing from both of them later, and they have just been a pleasure to work with. And I know I probably speak for the participants as well. They made the process very smooth, and I really appreciate their efforts in this endeavor. So just for an understanding, because I know a lot of times we talk about the VISTLs in conjunction with testing voting machines. But I'd also like to take a quick look here and kind of talk about how they fit into the environment of electronic poll books. So VISTLs, as we know, are accredited by the Election Assistance Commission after the National Institute of Standards and Technology and the National Voluntary Lab Accreditation Program, or NVLAP, have reviewed and approved their technical competence and lab practices to ensure the test authorities are fully qualified. It is required that each VISTL develop teams with expertise in 3 distinct disciplines, such as penetration testing, software testing, and election technology and administration. Each technical testing laboratory expert designated to review our electronic poll books according to our requirements of the Voluntary Electronic Poll Book Requirements version 0.9 must demonstrate proficiency in the following skills: familiarity with penetration testing methodologies, hands-on knowledge of vulnerability scanning, and as well as system exploitation, reconnaissance, hardware exploitation, wireless tools, and the ability to design and run tests and evaluate the report findings. Currently, both VISTLs have accreditation and from the EAC, and those are Pro V&V based out of Huntsville, Alabama, and SLI compliance located in Wheaton Ridge, Colorado. These VISTLs have performed EPB testing at the state and local level for years, and we'll allow them to talk more later, and really looking forward to that discussion. In October of 2022, we reached out to the VISTLs to inquire about their willingness to be able to participate in our pilot and having them to begin the review of our 0.9 requirements. Here are just a quick review of the participants in our pilot and the systems that they put in to each lab. So at Pro V&V, the commercial systems were the ES&S, 10X, VOTEC, and then their in-house system was North Carolina. And then the SLI compliance, their commercial systems were NoInc, Robus, and SLI compliance. Also, the in-house system at SLI compliance was Maricopa County. So really try to divide those up as evenly as possible with an odd number of participants. Evaluation categories. Each step evaluated all 7 participant scores from system testing to the requirements. Overall, including sub-requirements, there was 168 individual requirements for each participants that were reviewed. Out of the 5 categories that were created for analysis of test findings, these 3 categories remain the most relevant: successful completion of testing, insufficient documentation, or just simply missing or unsupported functionality. So the high-level findings of testing, what were they? Well, there wasn't a single requirement in which all piloted systems failed. The predominant reason for failure was insufficient documentation, meaning in the technical data package that was submitted. Our federal systems are first of its kind, and these systems currently aren't designed with federal requirements in mind. However, it's just a documentation issue. It doesn't mean that they can't meet the standards from a functionality standpoint. And so overall, when you consider documentation, these participants did very well. We understand that some requirements from our 0.9 may have been considered vague, leaving them subject to interpretation by the labs during evaluation. I mean, and again, this was a pilot, this was a learning experience, and we obviously have ways for us to improve upon for any type of future iterations with these with our program and our requirements to be more clear in our process when developing requirements. And so that's why stakeholder feedback review from participants and labs is such a key part of our process. And then we've also learned that manufacturers are capable of achieving the requirements to a degree as currently drafted, which was really positive. And then the high-level findings from our interviews. So we had extra interviews with the labs and our participants. Both VISTLs and manufacturers support a formal certification, a majority of them. Clear and frequent communication is vital. Some requirements require revision for clarity and applicability. And then there's also interest and demand to include functional requirements in a formal program. So, as I've spoken to in the beginning, and the commissioners as well, is, our focus has been accessibility, usability, and security with the kind of the intention of developing functional requirements, after the pilot and concluded. And that's what we're doing. And I'll cover that here in a moment. So the election supporting technology evaluation, our recommendations are to enhance electronic poll book data through additional questions in the 2024 election administration's voting survey. And so currently right now they ask jurisdictions, do you utilize e-poll books, yes or no? We would like to also hone in more specifically and ask the make and model, and that way it helps us have not only up-to-date data, but to be able to assist jurisdictions better by knowing exactly the type of systems that they have. We also, based upon all the exit interviews, the test reports themselves from the labs, talking with the labs, taking into our various stakeholders around the election community, we understand that we need to revise the voluntary electronic poll book requirements. Some of those, of course, will are being done as we speak. And then to develop a manual, an e-step manual, to clarify the processes and expectations of a potential formal program. And so our final recommendation to the commissioners is the Election Supporting Technology Evaluation Program does recommend that the development and implementation of a formal program for testing and certifying electronic poll books at the federal level. And again, this is based upon the entire pilot experience. This is based upon our conversations with our participants, with the labs, with our stakeholders. And it's been a very, very positive experience. And I'm so thankful to be a part of this. And I will go ahead and would just like to thank the commissioners to be able to present today. But before I do want to mention that the Election Assistance Commission Voluntary Electronic Poll Book Report, as well as the Voluntary Electronic Poll Book Requirements, so we're going to call those 1.0 because they have been revised based upon testing, as well as our manual. They are all available for public comment. The requirements let me back up. The poll book report is on our website at eac.gov, and then the voluntary requirements and the E-Step manual are available for public comment. You can just go right to our website, eac.gov, and go to E-Step, and there are ways that you can provide comments directly once clicking those links, or you could contact us directly at estep@eac.gov, or just anything that you had questions about in today's hearing. We certainly would love to hear back from you. So I also want to mention that we've sent these documents directly to the National Association of Secretaries of State, the National Association of Election Directors, as well as the National Institute of Standards and Technology, all electronic poll book manufacturers, including those that participated in the pilot, and both voting system technical laboratories. So with that, I just want to thank the commissioners, our participants again, and I really appreciate your time. I will now defer back to Chairwoman McCormick to introduce today's first panel.
Thank you for that overview, Jay. Our first panel will highlight the experiences of pilot participants who submitted their systems for evaluation in this program. I'd like to thank all our participants for joining us, and please let me introduce each of you before I recognize you for brief opening remarks. First, we have TJ Burns. If y'all, TJ, Scott Jarrett, and Roki Suleiman, if you could put your cameras on, thank you. TJ Burns is the Senior State Certification Manager for Election Systems and Software, or ES&S. He has 6 years of experience helping bring the electronic poll book to the market in states that require certification. Specializing in electronic poll book certification, TJ uses that experience to demonstrate ES&S's conformance to statutory law, including but not limited to security, functional, and documentation requirements. Then we have Scott Jarrett, the Director of Elections for Maricopa County, Arizona. He's responsible for directing all in-person voting, tabulation operations, candidate filing, campaign finance, and warehouse operations. Director Jarrett works closely with the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, Maricopa County Manager, Maricopa County Recorder, and reports directly to the Maricopa County's Executive Director. He is also an elections task force member of the Bipartisan Policy Center, a member of the EAC's Local Leadership Council, and serves as President of Election Officials of Arizona. And finally, we have on this panel Roki Suleiman, who is the Government Affairs Director for Knowing. Mr. Suleiman has nearly 2 decades of experience working in elections across the country. Prior to his current role, he was Executive Director of the DC Office of Elections and Ethics. He has also been the General Registrar for Fairfax County, the Election Director for Richland County, South Carolina, and served as the Deputy Director of Trumbull County Board of Elections in Ohio. Additionally, Mr. Suleiman has been an advisor for several organizations working on or observing international relations. Thank you all for being here again. I'd now like each panelist to give brief opening remarks, and we'll start with Mr. Burns.
Good afternoon. My name is TJ Burns. I'm a Senior Certification Manager at Election Systems and Software with over 6 years of experience helping bring the electronic poll book to the market in states that require certification. ES&S would like to thank the Election Assistance Commission, the commissioners, and fellow participants. ES&S had a good experience with the voluntary electronic poll book pilot program, enjoyed the professionalism, the open communication, the regular meetings, and the opportunity for vendor input provided by the EAC. The success of this program will be dependent on the continued execution of the aforementioned traits. ES&S was one of the first manufacturers to acknowledge the importance of independent electronic poll book testing in the market. We entered into the electronic poll book testing with the Vistal in 2013. And since that time, we have continuously been working with the states on certification requirements, procedures, and processes. While there's work yet to be done, ES&S believes that uniform testing for electronic poll books, similar to the EAC voting system standards, will streamline the process for manufacturers as well as jurisdictions, with the added benefit of improved performance, and security. We look forward to our continued involvement in the program, and thank you again for the opportunity to participate.
Unmute myself. Thank you, Mr. Burns. Director Jarrett, I will turn the floor over to you for your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. I appreciate your time today and to be here to talk about this very important pilot program. We were thrilled to be asked to be a part of this. Maricopa County, we first introduced our electronic poll books, our and in-house developed system in 2018. And we've constantly gone through iterations of improving it over the course of that time. So, and it was very important to us to want to participate into this program because of how large Maricopa County is. We're the second largest voting jurisdiction in the country, over 2.5 million voters. We're also very large geographically, larger than 7 states. And then we provide really a complex options for voters to be able to participate in improving that access for voters. And we wanted to make sure that the in-house developed system that we've created to serve Maricopa County voters, which we really believe is best in class, was considered as part of this, but also were there opportunities for us to improve and then set that baseline standard for e-poll books nationwide, and for those in-house developed e-poll books, that they can also participate in a program like this. So I want to thank the staff that came out and did the testing. I want to thank the SLI Compliance, that was the voting system testing laboratory that partnered with us. They were very professional, and I've dealt with them in the past, and I'm always grateful for their expertise, their dedication to voting systems, and now e-poll books. So thank you for your time today, and I'll turn it back over to the chair.
Thank you so much, Director Jarrett. And finally, we have Mr. Suleiman. Can you also provide us some opening remarks?
Sure, and thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners, and thanks for the opportunity to discuss this hearing on e-poll book certification today. My name is Roki Suleiman. I'm the Government Affairs Manager for KnowInc. KnowInc began in a small business incubator in St. Louis in 2011 and has since grown to be the largest provider of electronic poll books in North America. We pride ourselves on being a company built by election officials for election officials, and election integrity is the backbone of our product. Our CEO, Scott Leyendecker, saw an opportunity in the market to use emerging technology to significantly improve the voter check-in process for both voters and elections administrators. From those small beginnings, KnowInc has grown into a company that has checked in over 20 million voters and completed nearly 200,000 same-day registrations in the 2022 general election. When the pilot program was announced, KnowInc was really eager to join the e-poll book certification program, and we look forward to continued participation with the EAC as the program grows and states potentially adopt this process. And I look forward to your questions today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Suleiman, and to all the panelists today. We'll open this up to some questions from the EAC commissioners, and I will start for all of you. Each of you represents a different e-poll book option for election officials, from ES&S to KnowInc, and also a homegrown system. Can you provide an overview of your systems and what you are doing to ensure that they're ready for Election Day? And we'll start with you, Mr. Burns. You're on mute.
There we go. Thank you. The industry-leading Express Poll application is designed to work seamlessly with ES&S's universal voting system product family and tabulators, providing voters with a smooth voting experience from start to finish. Designed to meet the needs of various election types and workflows, Express Poll can accommodate all state required configurations. The Express Poll electronic poll book system gives election workers a simple to operate voter check-in device to quickly and accurately verify voters and issue ballots. Use of the Express Poll reduces wait time for voters, increases the accuracy of voters' personal information, and improves the election day experience for all. The 10.5-inch touchscreen provides an intuitive, easy to understand user interface like digital devices many election officials use in their everyday lives. At the polling location, the Express Poll terminal comes fully assembled and ready to use, making election day setup quick and easy for your election officials. Express Poll electronic poll book solution was designed with security in mind, with emphasis on multiple facets, including but not limited to the Express Poll application, operating system, data transmission security, server and network security, and physical security. Additionally, our Express Poll system regularly goes through independent third-party testing in addition to the VISTAL and state certification testing.
Commissioner McCormick may have froze. Thank you, TJ, for that. Director Jarrett, if you want to go ahead.
Thank you, Commissioner. So in Maricopa County, we have our in-house developed e-poll book system. We actually call that a site book system. It's based off a commercial off-the-shelf product. We use a Dell touchpad. And we've had great benefits from being able to use a e-poll book system. So as recent as 2010 and 2012, in Maricopa County, we had over 100,000 voters that had to vote provisional ballots. That was when we were in a precinct-based voting model. But we're also a very high percentage of our voters vote early or receive early ballots on what's now called an active early voting list here in Arizona. And without our e-poll books that we've been able to implement and the real-time connection, those voters that would receive that early ballot, if they showed up on election day, they would be forced to then have to vote provisionally. But because we've implemented that real-time connection, we can now determine whether they've returned that ballot or not, right? And then cancel off that second ballot or that first ballot, so that doesn't allow for then a double voting. Our e-poll books also allow a great function for our poll workers. Right. So now that we've been able to implement a vote center model here in Maricopa County using our site books, it will then be able to communicate information at the voting locations back to what we call a fusion center. And it's essentially we bring in the ACTIC, the Arizona Counterterrorism Information Center, all of our key stakeholders, our trainers into to support poll workers as they're serving voters on election day. So those poll workers can communicate information like such as wait times. So how many people are in line at any point in time at a voting location. And then we can publish that out to our website so voters can make informed decisions about where they want to participate. I also do want to highlight without e-poll books and the availability of them, we would not have been able to transition to a vote center model during the COVID-19 pandemic. So in 2020, we were offering our March presidential preference election a few days before that. So in March, that's when the NBA, the NCAA was shutting down their operations. And we were then tasked with providing voters and serving voters during that pandemic. And we had to close down many different polling locations due to a loss of poll workers. Normally, we put our polling locations in assisted living centers. And because of that, we were able to transition within a few days from a precinct-based model to a vote center model because of the e-poll books. So that's why it was important for us to be able to participate in this program, talk about that experience, but also highlight the functionality that we're able to provide for our site books, so the commission can consider that when they're establishing these baseline standards. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Jarrett, and thank you, Commissioner Hovland, for stepping in and that glitch. Next, we'll hear from you, Mr. Suleiman.
Thanks, Commissioner. And Knowing provides an electronic check-in solution for jurisdictions across the country that is flexible to work in either a precinct-based system or an early voting vote center. PollPad is an app that resides on an iPad and is built on an Apple platform and meets Apple security standards. We selected this platform because we felt that with this operating system would provide the most robust security posture for our clients. Our app can integrate with any of the voting machine tabulators to provide a seamless voter experience at the polling locations. And we also offer various software features that states can choose used based on their needs and connectivity. Security and integrity are our main priorities here at Knowing. We currently are SOC 2 compliant for our PollPad application and the ePulse operating system. Our company's in consistent developing and refining our software to meet both our client needs as well as meeting ongoing security demands. Although some jurisdictions have yet to certify the 2023 elections, we've already begun our preparations for the 2024 general election. We've recently completed some load testing on our system to stress its capacity. We do this testing quarterly, and we'll have more frequent tests closer to the election day as we refine capacity for 2024. We also work closely with our clients in preparing for Election Day. We provide needed technical bulletins, training material, and other services to ensure that our clients have enough information and tools for a successful election season. Our client services team has already begun surveying clients about 2023, and will begin encouraging them to look towards training and equipment needs for the upcoming cycle. And when I say the upcoming cycle, I do kind of want to stress that the 2024 election season isn't fast approaching. We're only 81 days away from our first primary with a client, and early voting begins for some clients in 64 days. 2024 is here already, and we're ready to serve.
Thank you, Mr. Suleiman. Vice Chair Hovland, do you have a question for the panel?
Yeah, thank you for that, Chairwoman McCormick. And I'll go reverse order here, reverse alphabetical order. And so I just wanted to ask you all, sort of having been through this pilot, can you talk about some of the advantages of having a program like this at the federal level? Again, starting with you, Mr. Suleiman.
Sure, Commissioner, thanks. For Knowing, the main advantage for this certification program is to have one uniform, robust standard across the country that jurisdictions and voters can have confidence in. One standard run by the federal government, similar to the VVSG, may allow us to simplify our app development and provide a uniformly accepted product. We're currently certified in 12 states that require it, and we continue to work with our state and local partners to meet any standards that they set forth, regardless of how this program would move forward. But a standard set at the federal level under the EAC and its committees allows for broad-based input from the industry. That's something we're really encouraged about. These standards should allow for innovation and yet keep security at a high level. The standards should also allow for innovation and yet keep, again, standards at a high level. Standards need to take into account that our software is built upon other commercial software that is consistently being updated also for ease of use, but for security. We don't want to be locked into a situation where we are certified into one iteration of a partner's platform, and that prevents us from doing mandatory security updates to keep the product up to date. Allowing vendors the opportunity to build and release software that includes the latest security protections from our industry partners and not holding us to one software iteration for certification is going to be important for this program's success. That's our main takeaway from this.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Mr. Jarrett.
Thank you, Commissioner. So when we're introducing technology into the voting process, it's very important for us to consider the ever-evolving threat landscape that election administrators are facing. And I view that this pilot program and eventually a federal standards for e-poll books will do in what HAVA and EAC did for tabulation systems. It implements similar type standards and fidelity and reliability and integrity into the check-in systems as administrators serve voters at the voting locations. As election administrators, we're always looking for as close to a perfect equilibrium between security, reliability, efficiency, accuracy, and transparency. And a federal standard will introduce all of those concepts into that check-in process. Whether it's security, it's setting a baseline and best practices for logical, physical, cybersecurity practices. It also will be considering when even when we're designing those e-poll books. Also reliability, those standards will do something very similar for that ease of use as those poll workers, ensuring that you have an easy to set up system as well as an easy to use system for those poll workers, but also the voters themselves. But more importantly, it's the transparency piece to this, ensuring that that federal standards are available. We can have the community have input in what those standards should be. We can have those businesses, our fellow vendors that sell e-poll books, having input. And then it's really setting that baseline of best practices for e-poll books throughout the entire industry, as well as those in-house developed systems as well.
Thank you for that. And Mr. Burns.
Thank you. The type of uniform testing for electronic poll books, similar to the EAC voting system standards, will help streamline the process for manufacturers, voting system test labs, jurisdictions, and be of great service to the nation in ensuring electronic poll books are secure, accurate, and reliable. ES&S looks forward to continuing to partner with the EAC during the development of this testing process. ES&S has previously provided formal feedback on the draft requirements and will provide additional comments on the updated requirements in the election supporting technology evaluation program manual, which was released for public comment this Tuesday. ES&S wants to re-emphasize the importance of requirements that are specific to electronic poll books and to not carry over non-applicable requirements from the EAC voting system standards. In addition, the testing program must be agile, so review and approval by the EAC takes place in a timely manner, given electronic poll book systems have more updates and will need to be implemented in jurisdictions quicker than voting systems. Electronic poll book review, testing, and approval by the EAC should not take months to achieve, as manufacturers will still need to obtain approvals by states prior to implementation. Lastly, ES&S recommends the EAC provide a reasonable time frame in which the manufacturers are allowed to meet the final requirements once they've been adopted by the EAC. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'll turn it back, Madam Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Palmer, do you have a question for the panel?
Yes, Chairwoman McCormick, I appreciate the opportunity. I want to thank the panelists. This is great information and feedback from the pilot. And I want to thank you for participating in the pilot. I was really pleased with the mix that we had of manufacturers and of course, having large county and a state involved, because that is a way of a lot of our folks, a lot of the election officials use poll books. And so I do have one question that all of you probably can provide some feedback on, and that is, from your perspective, what did you find to be the biggest challenge in meeting the requirements as drafted during the pilot? And we could start with the manufacturers. Let's start with Mr. Burns.
Thank you. The biggest challenge in meeting the requirements as currently drafted was not having time to make changes to our express poll system or documentation prior to entering the pilot program. We understand the process and are confident that we'll be able to meet the adopted standards, given that there is a reasonable time frame in which manufacturers are allowed to develop to the adopted standards. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Suleiman.
Thank you, Commissioner. When knowing learned about the program and got the standards we were going to be tested with, we looked at them internally, met with our devs, our QA folks, and everything else, and we were really excited about participating because we felt that we'd be able to meet most of the standards pretty easily. We didn't have to overcome any significant hurdles to meet the standards as drafted. Our main issue was producing or creating documentation that was necessary to demonstrate compliance with certain functions. We were able to work with the labs to discuss items that needed some of the documentation required, but and some of it needed to be reworked or created, and we just didn't have the time to do that. Because we didn't know we'd have to produce this documentation prior to the pilot program, we just needed a little bit more time. We feel that once the certification program moves forward and we have all the standards, well ahead of time, knowing's going to have no issue fulfilling any of the other requirements.
Thank you, Roki. Mr. Jarrett, what do you think?
Yeah, actually, I echo my other panelists' sort of challenges with meeting compliance. I think overall we are very successful and passed many of the different elements. Definitely demonstrating compliance through our documentation. For example, one of the requirements was to provide a report on your usability acceptance and testing program. And so in Maricopa County, we've taken our site books out to the community, the disability community, our poll workers and voters, and obtained enormous amount of feedback on how we can upgrade, improve our site books as we've introduced them since 2018. But we didn't document in a formal report all of those different steps. We have different pieces of forms or papers or ways that we've compiled that, but we've never published a formal report. So that was one of the areas that we were not successful in, that piece of documentation. So moving forward, we will be able to produce that type of report to then achieve compliance. But I also want to echo what Mr. Burns said. So, and I can see this potentially being a challenge in the future, is having the ability to have an agile or nimble system. So as I mentioned, in 2020, we were able to adjust the programming of our sitebook technology from a precinct-based voting model to a vote center within a matter of days. And if we would have needed to go through a federal certification program to get that recertified, that would not have been possible. Also in Arizona, our legislative cycle, sometimes it doesn't end until the very end of June. We have an August primary election. Those bills don't go into effect till 90 days later. So sometimes there's some changes that need to be introduced to our e-poll book system in between our primary and our general election. And sometimes that's only weeks in advance of when we're mailing out our ballots to UOCAVA voters, or first mailing out ballots to our early voters 27 days out before an election. So there's not always a lot of time to be able then to make that change and then resubmit it through a federal certification program and a state certification program. So I would encourage the commission to consider that as you're rolling out the final certification standards for e-poll books.
Well, I want to thank you for that feedback, and we'll continue to work with our team to make sure those lines of communication are open. Thank you. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Chairwoman McCormick.
Thank you, Commissioner Palmer. Commissioner Hicks, do you have a question for the panelists?
I do. Thank you, Chairwoman. Mr. Suleiman and Mr. Burns, as commercial e-poll book manufacturers, how might other manufacturers in your field benefit from achieving EAC certification?
Knowing believes that the entire industry will benefit from a uniform federal certification standard, not just the e-poll book vendors. This is going to allow companies to design software to known standards, and it's going to allow states to build certification programs based on those federal standards or add some additions to it. Not only will the e-poll book vendors benefit from this, but we believe that the election administration systems across the country are going to benefit from uniform standards, and the voters are going to benefit from uniform standards. Meeting a federal standard is going to give citizens faith that the products used in our elections are going to will be provided with security and integrity to the process. So if we have set standards across the board, it's going to allow new e-poll book vendors to innovate based on standards that are known. And it's going to allow current e-poll book vendors to keep maintaining statuses, certification standards to meet security and integrity in the process.
Thank you. Mr. Burns?
Thank you, Commissioner. ESNS believes that uniform testing for electronic poll books similar to the EAC voting system standards will streamline the process for manufacturers, voting system test laboratories, as well as jurisdictions, with the added benefit of improved performance and security. We look forward to our continued involvement in the program, and thank you again for the opportunity to participate.
Thank you. Director Jarrett, Jay Phelps talked about the pilot report and how 11 states have in-house systems. How might other states with in-house systems benefit from achieving EAC certification?
Thank you, Commissioner. I've been fortunate to be able to work with both the voting system testing laboratories previously. Post 2020, we invited them into Maricopa County to do audits of our tabulation equipment. And I think that's one of the big advantages that any local jurisdiction, usually it's the vendors. So it's the tabulation vendor or the poll book vendor working directly with those voting system testing laboratories. But by inviting them in to do a review of any systems that you have created, you're adding a lot of expertise and professionalism, and then that uniform set of standards that every local jurisdiction could use or a state jurisdiction could use to set that baseline for their equipment. In Maricopa County, we do have a lot of expertise and resources available to us, whether that's hiring cybersecurity experts to do penetration and vulnerability assessments of our equipment. But here, if you're participating in a federal certification program, you're getting that expertise through those voting system testing laboratories, coming in-house and doing that same type of testing, and then using that known baseline standards. So I view that as a huge advantage to those local jurisdictions to be able to participate in a program like this.
Great, thank you. Chairwoman McCormick, I'm turning it back over to you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Commissioner Hicks, and thank you, the commissioners, for your questions. This is valuable information for the commissioners as we go forward considering this program. And I want to thank all of you panelists for providing your insight on your pilot program experiences. So this will conclude our first panel, and we'll transition to our next panel, which is on the experiences of state and local jurisdictions with e-pollbook technology. Let me introduce you before I recognize you for brief opening remarks. With that, I'd like to welcome Mark Blotchen, who's Nevada's Deputy Secretary for Elections. In this capacity, he's responsible for overseeing the Secretary of State's Elections Division and administering the state's election processes, including enforcing state and federal election laws and procedures. He previously served as the Nevada Deputy Secretary of State for Operations. Prior to working for the Nevada Secretary of State, Mr. Blotchen served 20 years in the U.S. Marine Corps. Thank you for your service. He holds a BA in history from the University of South Carolina and an MBA in strategic leadership from the New England College. We also have with us Dr. Chad Kinsella, who is an associate professor of political science and co-director of Indiana's Voting System Technical Oversight Program, or VSTOP, at Ball State University. With his co-director, Dr. Jay Baga, and the VSTOP team, he directs and coordinates activities related to the certification and testing of election equipment, including electronic voting systems and electronic poll books. He manages the development of procedures and standards for the certification, functioning, training, and security of e-poll books used to conduct elections in Indiana. Finally, he and the VSTOP team work with state and federal agencies such as the Indiana Election Division and the Indiana Election Commission and the EAC to monitor compliance with state and federal standards for election equipment used in Indiana. I'd now like to ask each panelist to give brief opening remarks, and we'll start with Mr. Blotchen. Can you please begin?
Certainly. Thank you, Chairwoman. Good morning. I just turned actually noon, so good afternoon. I apologize out here in the Pacific time zone. But good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me here today. My name is Mark Voloshin. I am the Deputy Secretary for Elections in Nevada, representing Secretary of State Francisco Aguilar. The topic of electronic poll books is especially timely here in Nevada because we are transitioning to a new statewide electronic poll book. Currently, our 17 counties use a combination of different systems from different vendors, with one county using a home-built application. In the next few months, though, we will complete a statewide shift to a singular electronic poll book solution. This will complete a change that started a few years ago when we began to transition away from precinct-specific polling locations with massive paper rosters and began using electronic poll books in vote centers to enhance access to the ballot. To that end, a federally created set of standards and best practices for electronic poll books will be immeasurably useful to Nevada's elections officials. While we already have an internal process for ensuring the basic functionality of our electronic poll books, and we'll talk about that shortly, I hope, the creation of a detailed federal standard would add an extra layer of guaranteed security and accessibility that we simply could not equal at the state and county levels. This added oversight will ensure that our voters are using only systems that have met detailed technical and accessibility guidelines created by experts, and will enable us to point to those detailed requirements This is especially important as today's voters want to understand the requirements and can gain confidence in knowing the effort that went into their development. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blatchen. And now we'll turn to Dr. Kinsella for your opening remarks.
So good afternoon. I really appreciate the commissioners and Jay Phelps for letting me be here. So again, my name is Chad Kinsella. I represent VSTOP. Again, lots of acronyms in election business. So Voting Systems Technical Oversight Program. It's a mouthful. So I represent Indiana, and VSTOP has been doing accreditation for e-poll books for quite a while. Indiana was one of the first ones to develop some of the accreditation behind e-poll books. So we've been doing this for a while. And I think kind of to echo one of the key words I think across here is, I think this accreditation and a lot of the work at the EAC, I think this will continue to build confidence with our decision makers and our and voters. So again, very excited to be here and appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Kinsella and Mr. Blatchen. I'd like to open this some questions from the commissioners, and I'll start for both of you. Indiana and Nevada are among the first states to implement standards for testing or evaluating e-poll books. Can you each explain the reason for implementing a formal process for testing books in your states and what the process in your state looks like? And we'll start with you, Mr. Blatchen.
Perfect. Thank you, Chairwoman. So, I think that the reason behind it ultimately went down to security and the need for an establishment of standards. A little bit of background into what that process looked like. Back in 2019, there was a statutory change that our legislature created requiring some level of testing. We began our research throughout the 2020 election cycle and into 2021, and ultimately during a 2021 regulatory review created that defined process. What does it look like? Well, it's essentially a functions test, or a log, very similar to a logic and accuracy test that we have that currently exists for other systems. The county election officials are required to conduct that and review a certain number of again, processes, procedures, and features. Prior to the deadline is no later than 5 p.m. before the start of early voting. Again, in doing so, the goal was to simply make sure that the requirements that these machines, again, across the different counties and jurisdictions that have kind of a variety, that they meet a basic baseline functionality.
Thank you, Mr. Blatchen. Dr. Kinsella, can you let us know why Indiana started its program?
Sure. So when Indiana legislated the use of vote centers, the requirement for the vote centers was they had to use e-poll books. And so as vote centers took off, e-poll books, also the number of counties using e-poll books also did. And what ultimately happened, which was kind of interesting and I think unexpected at some level, was the number of e-poll book counties took off beyond the vote center. So there are now all 92 counties in Indiana now use e-poll books. So we have them in all of the different counties. And the idea is we wanted a certification process to ensure that all the machines that were being used by the counties met certain standards set forth by the state legislature to meet a very certain standard. So we don't allow companies to market or sell e-poll books until and unless they've been certified. So they have to be certified. Our current systems, we have so Indiana, we have a system in place where we hire out. We have different companies, including two that are here today, which do great work for us. So there are 3 companies that operate in Indiana according to our standards. Again, and they're very similar to those put forth by the EAC and the Voluntary EPB program. They have to be certified by one of the 2 VSTLs. They do web service framework testing to make sure that they connect to our SVRS. Again, Indiana is one of those states we connect to the SVRS during the election. They are then brought into the different e-poll books are brought into VSTOP to be certified by our team, including a mock check-in process, which we do. I've got to be the chaos monkey for that in a couple instances, and despite my best efforts, it's been certified. But anyway, we also review their technical data package about the system under consideration, and then a recommendation is written to the Secretary of State. So for Indiana, the e-poll book recommendations goes directly to the Secretary of State, and then e-poll books have to be certified every 2 years. for Indiana. So every 2 years that they have to go back through certification.
And as we said, the elections business is acronym heavy. SVRS stands for those who don't know.
State voter registration system. So it's so far, yes, lots of acronyms. So it's for our state voter registration system. We connect, and again, the idea being is that it's automatic. And again, one of the things I think was talked about in the previous panel, the idea being is that you could literally go for Indiana. You could, if you check into a website or check in, and once you are you have voted, you couldn't go across the county and try to vote somewhere else. And again, it was really interesting. We had Chris, a guy from Elkhart County, the clerk there, had talked about, like, there was someone who was very concerned about e-poll books, and showed him that process, and ultimately kind of convinced someone who was skeptical into a major proponent in that county for e-poll books. So that's SVRS and the reason we have it.
Thank you so much. And I will now turn this over to Vice Chair Hovland. Do you have a question for the panelists?
Yeah, thank you, Chairwoman McCormick. And one thing I want to just make sure to clarify, some of the comments earlier made me think that we should flag this for anybody watching and or maybe slightly less familiar with the Election Assistance Commission. We are a largely non-regulatory agency. We are, I like to say, a customer service agency. Our voting system standards are the voluntary voting system standards, and everything that we've been looking around at e-poll books would be able to set that, level set that. But then sort of similar to my question for the last panel, I'll start with Dr. Kinsella, but would like to hear from both of you, what you see as the advantages to having a federal certification program. I know both of you hit on this a little bit during your opening remarks, but would love to give you a little bit more time to talk about that. Thank you.
Sure, happy to do so. And again, I think the key thing, and again, like picking up themes, like when we have like conferences or meetings, I think the big thing is confidence here. And I think by the EAC putting these things forward, I think it builds confidence. So I think what happens is, and we've been contacted by states, and they said, okay, we see Indiana has this, and how can we get to this point? So I think it'd be really helpful to other states that they have that we have this recommendations out there. So I think it'll be very helpful across the board to have these recommendations for certification. And I think for us in Indiana, it just helps confirm for the public and our state legislature that we're meeting, a certain standard. And again, confidence is key in all of this, in this business. And again, this 2024 is we're in it right now. Confidence is going to have to be key moving forward.
Thank you for that, Mr. Wolashin.
Perfect. Thank you, Commissioner. So I agree. And I think one of the biggest benefits really relates back to the research that we did throughout 2020 and 2021, looking at developing our own internal regulatory process. It's complicated. And as you well know, that there's a lot of responsibilities that are already required of an elections administrator. In fact, the EAC is the wheel of professional responsibilities. I lovingly refer to it as the wheel of pain. I display that proudly to show people how much we're absolutely required to do already. And to tack on to that, simply become an expert in an electronic poll book, the technical mannerisms in which it would connect to a statewide voter registration list, how you deconflict real-time updates. It got very complicated very quickly. And so I think one of the biggest benefits, right, is that, while we're focusing on list maintenance and supporting voter outreach and education, the ability to, point to a series of recommended guidelines that are put together by the team at the EAC and the many subject matter experts and technical experts that you involve in that process. It takes a little bit of the burden off of us to have to come up with something very similar. There, of course, are still state-specific requirements. We still have obligations to our electorate. But ultimately, again, that takes a huge additional load off of our plate and allows us to focus on other responsibilities.
Thank you for that. And I know, I think we also recognize just the efficiencies. There's no reason to have all 50 states, recreate the wheel here. So, but also appreciated that wheel shout out. Thank you. I'll turn it back to the chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Palmer, do you have a question for the panelists?
Yes, Chairwoman McCormick, I definitely want to follow up on the wheel of pain. We want to definitely focus on that. Now, I'm just joking. I do have a question. So this is for both of you. First of all, I appreciate the work you're doing in your states. And when we started to talk about E-Step, we definitely knew that there was some great work going on in the states, and that we could learn how to develop these requirements in a testing program so all states could use the benefit of them. So as you know, we did review these state level requirements when drafting the voluntary electronic poll book requirements 1.0. So which of those requirements in your states would you like to see implemented at the federal level that you think have really benefited you and that the rest of the states would benefit from? And we can start with Dr. Cancel.
Sure. So we feel, again, so my team and I, having looked over, and again, we thought that this was a really great document and very helpful. So again, another shout out to Jay Phelps and his team for all the work they did. So we feel our standards match very closely with E-Step 1.0 and the electronic poll book requirements. And really, so I know, maybe I've been fortunate enough in Indiana that we've had some of these requirements for a little bit longer than most, as opposed to, so I mean, some other people went through the wheel of pain before I did, but really looking at some of, and again, Nevada, I can definitely maybe attest, so it's like, it might be something there, but the idea being is we really liked the document, and we really think, given the close proximity of what Indiana has in terms of certification to the recommendations, I mean, we really do think that, and again, more wheel of pain, but it's like, we really do think that it should be taken, in its entirety and as closely as possible. We think that it should be adopted as recommended. I think it would be a major undertaking. I do realize that, especially for states that are, starting from the ground up, but I think it is a worthwhile project, and I think the sooner it could be done. And again, back to confidence, I think it will build those confidence. I think it will put in the processes in place to make sure that you are properly, certifying, the machines that you need, and you'll get what you get what you put in. So I think that it's a very valuable, and I think all of it. I mean, I know that's the easy way out, but we looked at this and we really enjoyed it. We do think it's worthwhile. It is a very worthwhile endeavor to try to do those things, and I guess we are fortunate in that I feel like we have done a lot of those things, but it's a very worthwhile process.
Well, thank you, Doctor. Mr. Laughlin.
Thank you, Commissioner. I agree with the doctor's comments overall that, that nothing really in particular stood out, and even out of our own regulatory process. I think there's certainly more that the document identified, which I appreciate, and definitely reflects the high level of, again, professionalism and effort that went into it. There is one other thing that we were thinking about and kind of internally discussed, but I think it is also, in truth, being accounted for. But really what it is kind of a deliberate attempt to revisit these frequently. And I think the E-Step program by itself, combined with the revisiting of the VBSG requirements and then the establishment of 2.0, indicates that again, and that everyone across the board at the EAC and even the state and county levels are very much on the same page, that we need to be thinking strategically and looking to the future about technology that continues to rapidly advance, and to make sure that we are collectively again, not just establishing standards now, but revisiting them on a very frequent basis, maybe biennially or every federal cycle or something along those lines, simply to make sure that as technology increases, as opportunities for enhanced security to address cyber threats and otherwise, or accessibility opportunities come up, that those can be incorporated as well. I know some of the organizations that develop these applications, maybe you wouldn't want it to be on like a quarterly basis that the rule, the requirements are changing, of course. And I'm sure there's a sweet spot to it, but Simply, again, and this I think is reflected in the E-STEP program and just looking to the future. That idea of a more consistent, more routine revisiting of the regulations and recommended requirements, I think is going to be a continued benefit to voters and election administrators alike.
Well, thank you very much for that input from your states. We deeply appreciate it. Chairwoman McCormick, back to you.
Thank you, Commissioner Palmer. Commissioner Hicks, do you have a question for the panelists?
Yes, I do. Thank you. And following up on what Mr. Loshkin was saying, Dr. Phelps mentioned that we have a comment period out now. So if folks want to comment on that, they have an opportunity to do so at this very moment. Can either of you or both of you provide some sort of insight into the financial or legislative impact that the federal e-poll book certification plans may have on state laws? And Mr. Loshkin, if you want to start off, that would be great.
Perfect. Thank you, Commissioner. Certainly. So in regards to financial, when we looked at expanding upon and defining our requirements even further, very similar to Dr. Kinsella and what other states have done, we realized there was going to be a pretty significant financial requirement associated with that. Not a surprise that elections administrators oftentimes are under-resourced, or at the very least funded to very specific levels based on the needs of each state. And that would have been significantly challenging when we have, again, a multitude of other things that we're working on and trying to inform voters about. So the potential of this certification program, again, wouldn't eliminate our requirements of the state, but would certainly provide, again, an extra layer of security and accessibility that would be guaranteed, while at the same time eliminating what could potentially have been, 50 states plus DC and territories, each trying to come up with their own standards and then customize it. And then that additional expense to various vendors and otherwise that could have been pretty painful across the country at a time of challenged resources. And then in regards to legislative changes, I think this again is something that has been reflected in the voluntary voting system guidelines already here in Nevada, where instead of duplicating, VVSG 2.0, as I recall, it's about a 360-page document, of which about I thought it was about 300 plus pages are standards themselves. Instead of us having to recreate that as a potential legislative change and define them and then update them, here in Nevada, we have a single statute that says we must meet or exceed federal standards established by the Elections Assistance Commission. That enables us to piggyback on the standards that are, again, potentially reviewed, developed, and discussed, and of course, built by your experts, such that we don't have to risk missing something or the potential for a 350-page bill draft request that doesn't get heard or otherwise is changed and the like. So again, in regards to legislative impacts, at least specifically here in Nevada, I think there will be minimal ones otherwise, but it's something that I anticipate looking very closely at to see if we cannot mirror that same language for VVSG 2.0 across the entirety of the E-STEP program family.
Great, thank you, Doctor.
Sure, I think to piggyback off of what Mark just said, I like the word piggyback. So I think a lot of what this allows for is, with the EAC putting out this report and VVSG 2.0 and the other things, I think that states can, create, amend, or update state law or change administrative. But piggybacking, I think is, and I think a lot of, looking across kind of most states and territories, a lot of them, I think piggyback is a fantastic word in that, we can kind of co-opt these things, put them in and not have to put them in, all 300 and, plus pages and so forth. So I think that's a great idea. I think I want to, absolutely support, what Mark said. I think that's really good. Financially, there are costs that are going to be incurred by the vendors and by the states. Looking at Indiana specifically, we hire someone who is, we have a state certification specialist. VSTOP in itself, we do a lot of the certification, and we've got one particular person that does, EPB certification in particular, and other certifications. But so we have to hire those people. For Indiana, it may be different for different states. For Indiana, we hire out we contract with vendors to manage the SVR state voter registration system. So we do that, or it might be if it's done in-house, you may have to hire some people. So again, there's costs in bringing in people, a lot of administrative costs that go with it. So, we have those two things. And then for vendors alone, so every time that they have to, so we have 3 different vendors in our state that apply. Every time that they apply, now this is just for state certification, not the VISTLs, it's $5,000. That does help offset some of the administrative costs that we have in Indiana, but by no means does it totally, offset everything. So there's an expense involved for all involved, but it is I think a valuable process. And again, going back to what I've said, I feel like having these people and Mark, I think you're right. We despite best efforts by all different state governments, we are trying to make sure that we are as well funded as possible, and we do the best. Everyone tries to do the best they can with what they've got. But again, so. There is an expense to this, but I think it is good to have, again, confidence. Confidence is critical. I think, especially in this day and age, where we need to make sure that voters feel confident in the product that we're able to put out, and we can attest to that and show them a very valid process, which I think that we have, and I think the EAC has been critical partner in making sure that we have those things, not only for the e-poll books but our voting systems as well.
Thank you. Chairwoman, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hicks. And I want to thank all of our both of our panelists for your perspectives on the e-poll book technology and requirements from the state level. This concludes our second panel. We're now going to turn to our third panel, our final panel, which will take a glance into the future of certification testing for e-poll books. Please let me introduce each of you before I recognize you for a brief opening remarks. And I would like to welcome Jack Cobb, who is the co-founder and the laboratory director of ProV&V Inc., an EAC accredited voting system laboratory, or VISTL. Mr. Cobb has over 20 years of development and testing experience. He provides technical expertise and guidance to several entities in the voting systems testing arena, including federal and state certification bodies and voting system manufacturers. Mr. Cobb is accepted by the voting systems industry as a subject matter expert in voting systems and voting systems test and certification. We also have with us Mr. Michael Santos in the voting system test lab, who's the voting system test lab director at SLI Compliance. Mr. Santos has over 33 years in the quality assurance and test industry and has been part of the SLI Compliance VISTL team since 2006. He's well practiced in compliance testing and validation of requirements and specifications. He has a detailed understanding of VVSG 1.0, 1.1, and 2.0 requirements, and has been instrumental with mapping the VVSG 2.0 requirements for SLI Compliance's VISTL accreditation. So thank you both for being here. I'd like each of you to give brief opening remarks, and we'll start with Mr. Cobb.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Thank you for inviting me here today to discuss the EAC's Voluntary Electronic Poll Book Pilot Program. As outlined in the program's report, I feel this pilot was a success. While the electronic poll books tested did not pass all of the requirements in the Voluntary Electronic Poll Book Requirements version 0.9, I still consider the pilot program successful overall. The requirements used were not originally designed for the specific electronic poll books voluntarily submitted for this pilot. Similarly, the submitted poll books were not originally designed to meet these particular requirements. However, like most pilot programs, this gave us many valuable lessons learned, which is a key goal of any pilot. ProV&V was involved with the Voting Systems Technical Oversight Program, VSTOP, in developing the first requirements for electronic poll books and testing of the first poll books submitted under those initial standards. That early certification testing revealed some issues with both the requirements and the poll books themselves. VSTOP then updated the requirements, and the manufacturers updated their systems accordingly. The same iterative process of revising standards and systems is happening here. I understand the requirements have already been updated based on the pilot and are currently out for public comment. Overall, I found the EAC's report on the pilot to be comprehensive and insightful. It provides an excellent background on the electronic poll books testing and the EAC's goals of developing these requirements. I believe the experience like this pilot will contribute to stronger standards and more secure and usable systems in the future. Some key points I'd like to point out, even though Jay did hit most of these. There were 7 participants, 5 commercial and 2 in-house. Both VSTLs conducted evaluations. The average pass rate was 51.7% across all of the requirements, and all requirements were passed by at least one system, showing that they are achievable. And with that, I'd like to thank you again for the opportunity to offer our perspective on this important pilot program. The findings from this initial effort will no doubt help strengthen standards moving forward. We are committed to doing our part to advance security, transparency, and accessibility. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you and answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cobb. Before questions, I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Santos for your brief opening remarks. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to join the EAC's live stream event to discuss the Voluntary Electronic Pollbook Pilot Program. I am Mike Santos, Director of the Voting System Test Lab, the VSTL, here at SLI Compliance, which is one of the 2 accredited voting system test labs under the EAC. And Jack's over there at the Pro V&V, they're the second one. SLI was excited when we heard that the EAC was planning to move forward with the test and certification pilot program under the Election Supporting Technology Evaluation Program, ESTEP, and even more thrilled to be part of the pilot program. SLI Compliance has been working with states as well as conducting third-party testing of electronic poll books for states since 2013. With the various state certification programs and wide range of requirements, we are huge proponents of the EAC implementing a single cross-jurisdictional standard for e-poll books that could be leveraged by all states and provide consistency in the testing of these systems. Unlike voting systems, many e-poll books are connected via a public or private network so that records can be checked and updated in real time, and as such, they are not air-gapped. Interfering with e-poll books may not directly change votes. However, cyber interference certainly has the potential to sway votes. With that in mind, along with the fact that there is an increasing number of authorities using e-poll books, ensuring security along with accessibility, usability, accuracy, and functionality is vital. As the EAC has stated, the cybersecurity of e-poll book systems has never been more important. Unless systems undergo consistent testing to regulated standards, attacks from bad actors could be more likely in future elections. Implementing a formal program for testing and certifying e-poll books at the federal level based on common requirements from the states would be a long-awaited advancement that could help to ensure consistent basic functionality, security, accessibility, and usability of e-poll books while potentially saving states and e-poll book vendors time and cost. SLI Compliance is pleased to have helped confirm that the e-poll book systems evaluated under the Electronic Poll Book Pilot Program against the voluntary electronic poll book requirements are ready for use in 2024, requiring only minor changes to meet the proposed baseline standards. We look forward to assisting the EAC as needed to help make this pilot program a permanent part of the EAC's test and certification program. We also look forward to assisting with testing other election technologies in the series of pilots being considered by ESTEP. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Santos and Mr. Cobb. I'll now open this up to some questions from the EAC commissioners, and I will start for both. What are some common themes you noted from pilot testing? Specifically, what are the areas where participants did well and what areas may need improvement? I know Jay went over this a little bit, but I'd like to hear this from you all as well. Let's, Mr. Cobb.
A common theme that was throughout the pilot program was documentation. They really didn't have an opportunity to generate the documentation, even though it could. They had very little time to get the actual requirements and have documentation that supported that. But something that they did really well, I think, is the basic functionality of the electronic poll books, what a poll book does and the features that they had. They did that very well. And I would say the essential security they had done really well, but they probably still need to do a little more on the complex security side.
Thank you. Mr. Santos, what is your view on that?
I think, what we saw in the pilot program was that given that, the systems were coming in, were already fielded and not, tailored to the pilot program requirements. I think we saw that usability was good in each of the systems. I think we see, in the EAC report, it talked about what everybody did well were items like reset to default settings, color conventions, scrolling, system response time, error handling, warnings, alerts, instructions, and just plain language, as like I said, was in table 6 of the EAC report. And similar to like what Jack mentioned, I think again, going into a pilot program and using kind of off-the-shelf systems, not yet looking to address the requirements in whole. I think the basic functionality for checking voters in was very robust already, and I think that's kind of a offshoot from most of these systems being in other state certifications. So they have a little bit of a gist of what needs to be done, implemented into the systems, at least functionally. And of course, again, like everybody has talked about so far, areas for improvement, documentation. This was not surprising, especially in a pilot program. This is an area that is oftentimes overlooked or made as a secondary priority. And I think we see that kind of like being as part of like a commercial environment, whereas we're in a compliance environment and it has a much more significant focus. We see this even on the voting side, oftentimes with first-time program manufacturers. So just learning what kind of documentation needs to be done and implementing it is an eye-opening experience, I think, for pretty much every manufacturer. And documentation isn't easy. It takes a lot longer than people think it's going to take. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it is important for us to remember that these systems were not designed with these draft requirements in mind, that these systems were already existing and then we tested them to draft requirements. So I appreciate that distinction. Commissioner Hovland, do you have questions for the panelists?
Yes, thank you. I wanted you again both hit on pieces of this in your opening comments, but just wanted to give you both the opportunity to hit a little bit more on either sort of your perspectives of having gone through the pilot, sort of what you think of the outcome of that, but then also, ultimately thoughts that you might have around the value of a federal testing program. Mr. Cobb, if you'd like to start.
Sure. The value in the federal program, right now we do a lot of e-poll book testing. I think there's something like 12 different states that we do testing for. And each state is just a little different or have some coverage that are overlaps, but they still have individual test campaigns that we have to do for individual states. If you do a unified system, you're going to give a baseline system to everybody. If you go through federal testing, everybody knows what you've done, and the states can then actually scale back some of their specific requirements because they're going to be overlapped with the federal requirements. And also not just from that point of view, but also from state's point of view. I mean, here in Alabama, we don't have any electronic poll book certification requirements because I'm not so sure there's anybody who can sit down and write those right now, or that's not a high priority. And you would catch states like that in a federal unifying all of the testing at a federal level. You would be able to pull along some of the states that want to do something, but may not have the resources to do that.
Great, thank you. Mr. Santos.
Excuse me. I think it was successful and that it gave the poll book manufacturers an insight into the differences, again, between a commercial environment versus a compliance environment. As mentioned in the EAC report, in many instances, while the EPBs were capable of meeting the vast majority of requirements, what was brought into the pilot was already fielded systems that were not yet modified to meet the requirements. Also, as mentioned earlier, the pilot gives the manufacturers an understanding of the need for documentation of their systems and the depth needed. Again, we've seen this even in the voting side, where first-time manufacturers coming in don't quite understand exactly how much detail is truly needed. You want your jurisdictions to be successful, and you have to just really kind of approach it that way. I think the potential value of federal testing program is huge. It will help create a baseline consistency in the e-poll books that the public can have confidence in, knowing that at a minimum, any e-poll book that's certified meets various functionality, security, accessibility requirements. And it gives uniform guidance to e-poll book manufacturers, similar to a question that you, I think, asked the e-poll book manufacturers earlier, whether their existing e-poll book or new e-poll book manufacturers coming in, they have an understanding of what that base level of requirements and robustness is going to be. And as we've talked about already too, that state testing will benefit hugely, similar to like what Jack just said. If the EAC's e-poll book requirement set matches 90% of what states are looking for, then they only need to really do that additional 10% testing. So I think, that'll impact not only the states, but the manufacturers as well in a very positive way.
That's great. Thank you for that. Chairwoman McCormick.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hovland. Commissioner Palmer, do you have a question for the panelists?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chairwoman McCormick. I want to thank you, both the labs, for participating in this pilot and your flexibility. You play a vital role in the confidence of elections in this country, and I want to thank you for that. My question really is, a number of manufacturers may bring in electronic poll books for testing at some point if we adopt this program. And what would be your recommendations to manufacturers or state local jurisdictions who wish to achieve a federal certification? And any thoughts on how they might prepare for that testing process? Let's start with let's go with SLI. We'll start with SLI first and go to Jack.
Certainly. My recommendations would be, one, be sure that you're intimately familiar with the requirements. I think we've seen in various situations that sometimes manufacturers, whether it's voting or e-poll book, don't necessarily have a full grasp of the requirements in the standards, and then they get caught off guard when they come in for a certification. The second thing would be internally test to verify that you meet the requirements. When you come to the EAC programs and go into a test campaign, that really should just be kind of a validation that you're meeting all the requirements. If it gets bogged down into finding issues and having you resolve them and doing that cycle over and over, it gets very costly and time consuming. But if you test it internally, you can go in feeling confident that you're going to pass 99% of those requirements, at least, if not 100. Which kind of leads me into, if you're not 100% sure of the meaning or the intention of a requirement, ask. Whether you ask one of the VSTLs or the EAC, ask. If you see two ways or more to interpret a requirement, it's human nature to take the path of least resistance, the easiest way to implement. That is usually the wrong way. Save yourself the frustration, the lost time, the extra cost that you'll incur later in that test campaign, and just ask so that you can implement it correctly during your development cycle.
Thank you, Mr. Cobb.
Yeah, I would say ditto to everything he said, but I would really like to emphasize that last part he's talking about. If we do get a unified program going where everything is done from the EAC on a federal level, the labs are going to have immense experience with going through how the requirements are interpreted, and we can provide a lot of information for very little cost. It's just a simple question, and we can answer that. And if you don't like our answer, they can always go to the EAC to see what they think, but we're probably already doing what the EAC has asked. But for people, like Mike said, to take the path of least resistance, and think, well, maybe that standard won't even apply really, or we can do it by, shuffling some papers around this way instead of actually doing it in the system. Those kind of things, if once you're in certification, they can get really costly, really expensive, and you may have to go all the way back to the drawing board because you don't have a way to meet that requirement. You have a way to meet what you thought was the requirement.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that input. We appreciate it. Back to you, Chairwoman McCormick.
Thank you, Commissioner Palmer. Commissioner Hicks, do you have a question for the panelists?
Thank you. I want to follow up a little bit on what Commissioner Palmer was saying there, in that the EAC anticipates various questions pertaining to the financial aspects of certification. Could one or both of you talk about the anticipated or expected cost of evaluating systems at the labs, and basically how is that cost determined? We can start with you, Jack, if you want.
Okay.
Or whoever.
So this specific pilot, we got the requirements and we were able to kind of judge out what it was going to cost in the amount of time and effort. The final requirements will really define how much it is going to cost. What makes it into the final requirements and how we're going to have to test it will push towards the cost of what it is going to cost. Now, leaning on experience from states, they vary dramatically on those requirements. I think that somewhere in the neighborhood of $7,000 or $8,000 to go into the Commonwealth of Virginia, whereas to go into Indiana, it's like $15,000 to $20,000. And so those requirements are going to drive what the cost is. And right now, with what we were just doing, it was about a 2-week effort, so about 80 hours worth of effort, and then including reporting and calls and other things. It was a little more expensive than I think it will be in the future when we can get some efficiencies built in, and we've done them a few times and we know exactly how to do it.
Great. Mr. Santos?
Similar to what Jack just talked about, there's a number of variables involved in estimating the cost of a test campaign. The size of the system, how many different tablets or operating systems are included, how many screens does the system have, how many total features or functionalities are incorporated, and that's going to include not only features and functionalities to meet the EAC requirements, but as I think people were talking about a little bit earlier, the systems often have state or jurisdiction specific features or functionalities in there as well, which under an EAC cert, I would assume would also be looked at, and the system would be looked at in its totality. How big is the documentation package? And the more features you have, the more screens you have, the larger the documentation package is going to be. And then it also ties into what will be the final requirements set in the EAC standard. How many functional requirements are yet to be included. And then there was talk, I think, in the report about potentially having some requirements being mandatory, other requirements being optional. So, we'll have to kind of factor that in any given system. And then, as I talked about a little bit earlier, has the system been internally tested to all the pertinent requirements? This will most likely affect the test campaign timeline, shortening it if it's well tested internally, or potentially lengthening the test campaign if minimal testing was done. In the pilot program, I think it took us, approximately about 2 weeks to do the testing for the requirement set that we were given. Kind of anticipating, additional requirements and things like that being included. We're right now kind of anticipating, 2 to 4 weeks to get through an e-pollbook test campaign. Cost-wise, again, with all those variables, it could be anywhere probably from maybe $15,000 to $35,000 would be our estimation at this point.
Thank you both, and thank you both for what you do. Chairwoman, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hicks. Thank you, Mr. Cobb and Mr. Santos. Your comments are extremely valuable to us, and we appreciate your partnership over the years. So thank you for being here for today. And thank you to all of our panelists who participated in today's virtual event. Your insight and unique experiences in this pilot has been crucial to understanding the capabilities and limitations of e-poll books in the United States and our path forward on these requirements and further testing. The EAC will also be holding another virtual meeting on this topic on December 4th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. For more information on this, as well as the Voluntary Electronic Poll Book Pilot Program report, you can go to eac.gov. And this concludes today's virtual event, and I will now take a motion to adjourn today's meeting.
I move that we adjourn the meeting.
I would second that.
It has been properly moved and seconded to adjourn the meeting. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
No opposed. So thank you so much. I appreciate all of our participants, and we hope that this is